Hi everybody, this is Woody again, and the next step that we're going to talk about is going to be a product called the NFC Killer. It really should be referred to as an RFID killer because it doesn't just work with NFC. But before we dig too deep into how this product actually works, and I was actually requested to do this next, I want to talk a little bit about RFID and how it works. As we look at this, the big thing that I want you to understand is that there's a multitude of products that will use RFID technology. Some of them are referred to as NFC. NFC is more of a protocol, is the way that it was explained to me. But all of the different frequencies, if they're using RFID, that's really what they're using, and it's just a protocol within that. So NFC typically is referred to the frequency band that it works, which is 13.56 megahertz. And we're going to go through some of the equipment that we can look at. First, I'd like to use this as an example. This is actually a business card from the guys at Red Team Alliance. This is from Babic. Those guys are incredible. If you get a chance, watch some of their videos, watch what they do, and they do some amazing training. Highly recommend them for anyone in the industry who deals with RFID as a security professional. But I like this card because it is an easy way to be able to explain what we're looking at today. You see the copper that's going around here? What that's doing is absorbing energy from whatever reader there is. These cards by themselves are passive. They make no RF signature of any kind, no electromagnetic signature of any kind. But when this coil and the loops in it are tuned to whatever frequency it is, this is 125 kilohertz, it starts creating energy. As it creates energy, that's stored on this chip in here. And when it receives enough energy, that chip will go ahead and start to pulse back. The antenna will read the pulses as ones and zeros that come off of this card. And when that happens, this card will give its identifier back to the reader, and that's how the communication is done. So I like this card because it gives you a good chance to understand that. So now what we're going to do is look at the NFC Killer. I'm going to take it apart, and we're actually going to get a chance to look at the inside of it and try to understand it a little bit better, and then look at some of the other equipment that we have that uses RFID to see how this could be dangerous. So this is the NFC Killer and what it looks like on the inside. Now, some of you may have heard of the USB Killer, similar concept. What they've done is they've loaded this with capacitors. Those capacitors store energy, and then when you release this through this coil, much like we saw before, this is going to send out a large burst of RF energy with an attempt to overload the card or possibly the reader. And we're going to try against both today. To put this into something that's a little easier to understand, if you have any of the wireless chargers out there, that's how these work. This is just a simple charger that you would take a phone, set it on, and you see that it begins to charge. Right? So there we go. Very simple, very easy. Now, these work at 125 kilohertz. How do we know? Well, we have our RF field detector here, Proxgrind makes, and I like having these to look for skimmers because as you get close to any of the fields, whether it's the 125 kilohertz or if you have a device that uses NFC, a couple of things that you're going to be able to do: 1356, 125. So this lets you see if any of those are around you or in play. So nice piece of equipment there. But these coils here are sending out 125. It sends it out at a pulsed frequency, and that's used because it actually creates electricity through the electromagnetic field, and that's what charges your battery. As you can see, they're using the same kind of coiling in this. What they've done is they have more coils, and they also, through the capacitors, are going to be trying to push more energy at one time. So what we are going to attempt is to see what happens when this actually goes out and is used against equipment. We're going to use it against some 125 kilohertz cards. We're going to use it against some 13.56 cards. We're also going to talk about what happens when we use it against readers themselves, and we're going to go ahead and do that. And we're going to show you some of the other equipment out there that actually works at 125 kilohertz, such as your key fobs. So if I put this in here, this is reading the 125 kilohertz. So if I take this key and put it in, it tells you what protocol that's using. If I take this key, and these ones don't have it actually in the fob, it's actually a chip that's in the key itself. So when I put this in here, that's the type of chip that's in here. So what we want to do is be able to take that same information that we're seeing now, figure out what around us uses RFID, and do we need to protect it against a device such as this. When I keep these in my classroom, because I have a lot of different students, I actually write do not touch, and normally I will have the power buttons completely covered so you cannot get to them, because I do not want someone just recklessly pressing this button around. But I haven't tested it that hard, so that's what we're about to do now. So the next block we're going to do, we're going to go ahead, we're going to turn this on, and we're going to hit some cards. We're going to hit a phone, and we're going to hit a reader, and we're going to see if it does any damage or not. Okay, so what we have now is I've got a card right here, and we see that we're able to read it. So this card right here is at 13.56 megahertz. So we're going to go ahead and see if we can read this. Yep. It's a MyFair. We're able to read it, no problem. Now what we're going to do is do the same thing after hitting them with the NFC Killer. Now the NFC Killer, a couple things that I want to make sure. I'm going to completely remove the button that says continuous because I want to control when this does. So I've removed that button just for safety while we're testing. Now, this card is a 125 kilohertz card. We're able to read it. Now I'm going to go ahead and set this here. I'm going to power down my reader just to make sure. And I hold the power on this, and that's how you get it to turn on. So hold it. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is if I hit this button, a red light will turn on letting us know that it zapped. There it was. Now take the card, take my reader, I'll go ahead and power this off. Will not read. So this card has been zapped. Okay. Okay, now we have the card that was 13.56. We'll set this on here. Turn this on. All right, now we'll zap it one time. Okay, now take this card. No tag found. No tag found. So it effectively has worked against cards. Now what we want to know is what would this do against an actual reader? Does it attack the antenna or does it destroy the reader itself? So that's something that we have to look at to be able to try to figure it out. So this is a Proxmart Pro. Unfortunately, a few weeks after I got it, it stopped reading 125 cards. It will only work on 13.56. I've tried multiple antennas. I've tried the dual band antennas, everything else. I haven't been able to get any joy out of it. So we're going to go ahead and use this as one of our readers. So it's a 13.56 reader. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in place and have it go as if it's looking for a card as I fire. So there we go. All right, now we'll come back and look at that. Okay, let's see. It's still sending a signal out at 13.56. So looks as if that's working. Now, remember, this is a little different than a regular reader. Now what I want to know is, what will this do against an actual reader itself? So if you were to walk up and put this directly against a reader, what would happen? So that's what we're going to do. Okay. Okay, so we fire. Now, it should read this card. No, the reader's done. Let's do a power cycle. This is a different card than I had zapped initially. This one should read. Okay, is it still releasing energy? It's no longer releasing any energy at 125 kilohertz at all. So this reader is done. It's not releasing energy. It won't read a card. This has destroyed the reader itself. Next, when we come back, we're going to see what this does to a phone. One of the things I also wanted to show was how much energy is typically absorbed when this is happening, a coil on either a charger or a reading. So this coil is obviously not perfect that we have here, but I want to show when I turn this on. This is the charger that was charging the iPhone earlier. So when I turn this on, if we watch the screen, we see that we start having some small, insignificant bumps. Not too much at all, right? And I'm set on volts. So you can see that it's a small amount of energy, but nothing too crazy at all. Now what we're going to do is we're going to remove this, and we're actually going to look at what happens with the NFC Killer. Now again, you can see with the iPhone, when I put this on here, it still charges, everything's functional, and we're good. However, let's go ahead, bring the NFC Killer down. And now what I want you to do is look at how much energy gets released when I now fire with the same coil. Now, it gives us a negative rating just because this is an inductive loop and it all connects, so you get a negative voltage reading anyway. But if you noticed, we had upwards of anywhere from 3 to 4 volts when we hit this. So that's how much more energy this is pushing than a phone charger or than a lot of the other devices that are out there or readers on just a small, imperfect inductive loop. All right, so now we have an old iPhone. I don't turn my iPhones in, so I'm just going to use this for something that we can find as a constructive way to use it. Here's a 13.56 or an NFC card. As you can see, the phone attempts to read it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take this and put it on here. And we're going to go ahead and fire a pulse at it. Now when we did it, you saw the battery, boom, attempted to take a charge. Phone's still on. Now let's see. NFC, oh, and it still reads NFC. So while the NFC Killer has been able to effectively stop a reader from working anymore, it has definitely been able to wipe badges. But when we fire it on a phone itself, it looks like it has no problem taking it, and it still reads NFC cards. So the NFC Killer, while being extremely effective against a lot of equipment, is not effective against a phone. I didn't know for sure. I wanted to do this live just to see what would happen. So at least against this iPhone, it did not destroy it. It did not hurt it in any way. But all the cards it went up against, absolutely. The readers it went up against, absolutely. And these are smaller readers. I don't know how it would work against a larger reader. I will say also, once I power cycled the Proxmark Pro, and that's why I used one that had stopped working on its own. I hadn't done any modifications to it. But once I cycled it on its own, it will no longer detect, and I tried multiple antennas again, it will no longer detect its antenna. So it effectively is no longer working either. So I knew the LF wasn't working, but now the HF side won't connect. So that's the NFC Killer. It is definitely something you want to keep away from your readers. It's definitely something you want to keep away from your cards. I highly recommend getting one of these RF detectors if you don't have one. And just for fun, before we go, let's see what frequency this is pushing out at. It's pushing out at both. Oh, and we burned up, it looks like, our 1356, which we can test. Oh no, we actually burned up our 125. Our 1356 is still reading, and our 125, it looks like, is not. So it's pushing out a pretty good amount of juice, and it's pushing out at both frequencies at the same time. So I appreciate your time. Hopefully this was educational for you and understanding this. Some people had asked about the NFC Killer and trying to get some more information about it. Be extremely careful with it. If you have one in your lab, make sure that you either have the battery disconnected or that you block off the power buttons, and that's why I removed the continuous power button altogether. Thank you for your time. Please leave comments down below, and we'll see you next time.